It gives me great joy to be here with you after a long gap of 9 months. In 2023, December only, I gave you a sermon in this chapel. So after a long gap, I got the privilege to address you in this manner. And I consider this as a privilege and joy. Well, I often say, whoever speaks or whatever he speaks, the only thing that matters is how we respond to what we hear. So we should have a right attitude. One C.S. Spurgeon, the Prince of Preachers, was addressing a group of young preachers. He was teaching about homiletics, how to preach, the subject how to preach. During the course of his lecture, he said, "Young men, if you are speaking about heaven, be very careful about your facial expressions and your gestures. Nobody has ever seen heaven. So when you speak about heaven, you have to speak with sufficient energy, excitement, and enthusiasm. Because from your facial expression, they have to get a good picture about heaven." Then one of the students got up and asked a question, "Sir, what about our facial expression when we preach about hell?" A very good question. Brilliant Spurgeon said, "Don't worry. To preach about hell, your ordinary face will do." Whether it is in England or in India, whenever believers come and sit in the presence of God to hear the word, we may feel that all of them are meditating about hell. Today my topic is neither heaven nor hell, so I don't have any plan to change my facial expression every now and then. But it is my request to all of you this morning that all of you should meditate about heaven till my message is over. Okay, let us consider a very, very familiar passage this morning. Romans chapter 8, verses 28 and 29. Actually, I will be explaining verse 28, but to get the background, let us read 29 also. Any of you can read from New King James Version if it is available. May the Lord speak to each one of us through His word and by His Spirit. This verse, especially verse 28, is a very, very familiar verse to each one of us. We often by heart this verse, we underline this verse in our Bibles and we quote it. But the sad thing is this, many a time, many of us do not know the exact meaning of verse 28. So let me clarify some doubts regarding that verse and let me try to explain the actual meaning. Actually, this verse does not say that all things that happen in our lives are good in themselves. Let me repeat. Many a time people quote this verse and say everything that happens in lives are good in themselves. No. This verse does not teach us that way. Moreover, we know from our own experience and the experience of godly men who lived in the past that everything that happens in our lives are not good always. For example, think about the life of Joseph. His brethren did many evil against him. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 15, they themselves admit that. They say that they have done evil against their brother. Again in Genesis 15:20, Joseph says, "But as for you, you meant evil against me. You meant evil against me. But God," that is important, "but God meant it for good." So everything that happens in our day-to-day living may not be good. There may be a mixture of good and bad things from human point of view. Number two, this verse does not teach us that all these things automatically will bring out a good in our life. It does not teach that all the things will automatically bring out some good. That also is wrong. Then what is the meaning of this verse? This verse clearly teaches us that God makes all incidents in our lives to work together for our good, provided we are the children of God and we love God sincerely. So that is the sum and substance of verse 28 that I am going to explain in detail. To get the correct meaning of verse 28, I think New American Standard Bible, NASB and NIV are giving a better rendering. So let me quote this verse from NASB and then from NIV. In NASB we read, and we know that, next word is important, God causes or makes all things to work together for good. You see, that word God is missing in NKJV. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good. It continues like that. NIV is far better. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him. So that is the correct meaning. There are so many things happening every day in our lives, but God is working in all things. What for? To bring out a good from those things. So that is the meaning of this verse. Now when we consider this verse can be called a promise as well as an axiom. Axiom is a self-evident truth or eternal truth. If an eternal truth is mentioned here, at the same time, it is a promise. Why did I say it is a promise? How do we know that a verse is a promise or not? This is not something related to this, but I am giving you some extra information. Sometimes when we read the book of Proverbs, certain things in the book of Proverbs are not promises. They are only probabilities. Don't get confused. For example, Proverbs 22:6. What do you read there? A well-known verse. There we read, train up a child in the way he should go. The second part. And when he is old, he will not depart from it. Is that a promise? Think about it. Or is it a probability? So how do you judge whether a verse is a promise or simply a probability? You see, if the second part says something that God does, then it is a promise. Otherwise, it is simply a probability. Proverbs 22:6 is simply a probability because second part says, and when he is old, who is this he? Who is this he? The child who became a man. The second part is supposed to be done by a man. So it may not be always true. Generally it is true, but there are many exceptions. When we study history, Charles Darwin was well trained in the Sunday school. Karl Marx, all of them were well trained in the Sunday school, but later they became atheists. You see, so that's only an additional example I told you. But when we come to Romans 8:28, I told you the promise, it is a promise because it is something that God does. God causes all things to work together for good. Therefore, we can depend on that and we can believe that it is a promise. Okay, now let me quickly bring into your attention 5 truths about this promise. When I say 5, don't worry don't be afraid that I will be taking a lot of time. I will be keeping the time. 5 things quickly I will tell about this promise. First one, the certainty of the promise or the reliability of the promise. How does that verse begin? In all translations, it begins like this, and we know. And we know. Paul does not say, and we suppose, or and we think so, or and we assume. No. And we know. We know it for sure. It is 100% certain. We know these things. So what do we know? That we know that God causes all things to work together for our good. We know it for sure. Remember, the Bible says that we do not know many things. We do not know many things that we know from our own experience, and Bible also says so. For example, in Job 8:9, to save time I am quoting, Job 8:9 we read, for we were born yesterday and know nothing, because our days on earth are a shadow. We born yesterday and we know nothing. In a general sense, that is true. Then what about this same chapter? Whenever we study the Bible, we have to consider the context. What about the same chapter, Romans 8:26? We read 28. What does Paul write in 26 of Romans 8? Likewise, the Spirit also helps in our weaknesses. The next word is important. For we do not know what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit Himself makes intercession for us with the groanings which cannot be uttered. So Paul has written, we do not know even how to pray properly. Of course, we all are praying every day, but Paul here says that we do not know the will of God before we start praying. That is why the Spirit of God helps us. So we do not know many things. But in 28 he says, and we know. Beloved, even though we do not know many things in this world, even though we do not know many things in the Bible, there are a few things we should know. That is a must. All these things are certain fundamental truths in the Bible and some promises we should know. So here we read one such promise. Actually, I can quote many other verses also. You may remember 2 Timothy 1:12, first part there Paul writes, for I know whom I have believed, for I know. There are certain fundamental things we all should know for sure. That is essential. So here also we read about something we should know and we know. What do we know? That God works in all things to bring a good out of the things that happen in our lives. Okay, that is the first truth we can learn from this promise. Number two, the condition for this promise or the requirement for this promise. The condition or requirement. Remember, no blessing or no promise in the Bible is unconditional. Let me repeat. No promise or blessing in the Bible is unconditional. With all the promises, a condition will be attached. Either it will be mentioned specifically or it is clear from the context. Now here in this verse, the condition is very clearly mentioned. It is not a promise that all can claim, but it is a promise for those who love God, who have been called according to His purpose. The second part of verse 28 says so. For those who love God, who have been called according to His purpose. When we read these phrases, don't think that it is referring to two groups of people. Those who love God are the same group of people who are called, who have been called according to His purpose. Both are one and the same. But when we read this, we may have a doubt. Do we really love God? Many a time from our experience, we know that we are not loving God adequately. Some days we will love God more, or some other days we may love God less. That is there. That's our human experience. But if we have a sincerity, if we have decided sincerely to love God, definitely this promise is applicable to each one of us. So this is a promise for all the believers. Moreover, it is given in the present tense, those who love God. So what does it imply? We have decided to love God once when we became believers. But that is not sufficient. It should be an ongoing process every day. We have to try our level best to keep on loving God. In other words, this promise is applicable to those who maintain a constant communion with God and those who live in the will of God. So all cannot claim this, but those who are maintaining a communion with God daily and who are living according to the will of God can claim this promise. On the other hand, if we rebel against God and lead a backslidden life, we cannot simply claim this promise. So, we have to prove that we are loving God. How? By obedience of God's word. If we sincerely love Him, we will definitely obey Him. So, those who are loving Him and proving their love through obedience can definitely claim this promise. That is the second truth we can learn from this verse or this promise. The third one, the comprehensiveness or totality of this promise. Comprehensiveness or totality or the range or extent of this promise. Different words can be used. The extent of this promise. What is the extent of this promise? Please observe the words all things. This verse or the promise clearly says that all things, God causes all things to work together. Nothing is left out. All things means all small and big things that happen in our lives. All expected and unexpected events. All good and bad from a human point of view. So remember, beloved, nothing happens accidentally in the life of a Christian or a believer who sincerely loves God. Of course, as a consequence of some of our sins, something may happen. I am not including that. But if you sincerely love God, nothing happens accidentally in the life of a believer. So what all things are included in the all things? I told you that all small and big, expected and unexpected, good and bad, these are general terms. Again, consider the context. Let us consider the same chapter. What do you read in Romans 8:18 and then Romans 8:23? I can quote three verses. Romans 8:35. Romans 8:18, that is the context. There Paul writes, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time," please notice that, "the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us." So what all things are there in the present time? There are sufferings in this present age. There are sufferings in the life of a believer. A believer is not immune to sufferings. Sufferings are there. Paul himself writes in the same chapter, again in 23, not only that, but we also who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves. Underline that, groan within ourselves. Verse 18 says, we have sufferings in this present age. Verse 23 says, we groan ourselves, groan up within ourselves. We ourselves groan within ourselves. You see, there are groanings in this present time. Then what about 8:35? Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? 7 things are mentioned there. But remember, this is not an exhaustive list. This is not a complete list. This is only a sample list. So all these things are there in the life of a believer. We have distress, persecution, famine, nakedness and so on. Paul also suffered many of these things. So beloved, remember, so what all things are there? What all things are included in all things? All our sufferings, all our groanings, all our tribulation, distress and everything that happens in our lives. Nothing is left out. But the beauty of chapter 8 is, even though Paul wrote about all these unpleasant events, what does he write in 23b, second part of, I often say B means second part of 23 and 24. So there Paul writes about a blessed hope. We are eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body. Then verse 24, for we were saved in this hope. That is the beauty of Christian life. Even though we have sufferings and groanings and all untoward incidents in our lives, we have a blessed hope. And what is the basis of this hope? That is verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him. That is why we can enjoy and have this blessed hope. So in short, all things includes each and everything that happens in our lives. And most of the things are not good things from a human point of view. All our sufferings, all our groanings, all our persecution, distress and everything is included in all things in verse 28. So nothing is left out. Let me go to the fourth one. That is the one I would like to explain a little more. Fourth one, the cause behind this promise or the reason behind this promise. Who is the cause? It is not a thing but a person. That cause is God Himself. He is the first cause and the ultimate cause of everything. God is the one who causes all things work together in our lives for our good. And we know that in all things, God works for the good. So God is the cause. God causes all things to work together for good. NASP puts it like that. Works together. That comes in NKJV also. So this verse says that our God is a working God. Many a time when we read the Old Testament, especially Genesis chapter 2, the first 2 verses, we may feel that God has rested from his creation work. Now what does God do? Many believers think that now God is taking rest in heaven. He is simply lying down in an easy chair and he is taking rest. He is not doing anything. But that is wrong. Genesis passage says that God rested from his work, the creation work. But it doesn't mean that now God is simply taking rest and he is a lazy person and he is not at all doing anything. But even now he works. He sustains the whole universe, the whole creation. That is why in John 5:17, our Lord Jesus said about his Father, but Jesus answered them, my Father has been working until now. You see, Jesus said, my Father has been working until now and I have been working. So both God the Son and God the Father are working. Our God is a working God. Okay. So our God is a working God. That idea is coming in many passages in the New Testament. Romans 11:36 alone I will quote. There Paul writes, for of him and through him and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever. Amen. So God is the first cause of everything. God is the final cause of everything. He is the sovereign ruler of this universe. For of him and through him and to him are all things. In this way many verses can be quoted, but I am not extending them further. Beloved, our God is the creator of everything and he controls everything. He works in everything that happens in our lives and he brings everything to its completion. In other words, he is the one who makes everything good in our lives. Our God is a working God. Okay. Now a question comes, how does he work? How does our God work? That I would like to explain a little more. How does our God work? We often say that our God is a loving God. Our God is omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient. So many things we say about him. But another neglected fact about God is this. Our God is a good teacher. Our God is a teacher. He teaches us many things. He teaches his children many things. He teaches the mankind many things. So how does he teach we believers or those who love him? How does he teach? 3 things we have to understand. You see, God's teaching system is different from man's teaching system. God tests and teaches at the same time. First thing you have to observe about the teaching of God is God tests and teaches at the same time or simultaneously. I will explain. Let us consider our teaching system or learning system. Whenever you join a college, whether it is Bible college or the secular college, you know that there is a prescribed syllabus for each and every course. The syllabus will be given in advance and the teachers will come and teach for many months. Even if it is a semester, it is 4 and 45 months. So teaching is more. Finally, there will be an examination for 2 hours or 3 hours. What about you? I think it is only 2 hours. So after learning for 6 months, you are writing an exam for 2 hours. But God's system is different. God will teach us certain things only through testing. Let me give the example of Adam and Eve. What about Adam and Eve? We often think that Satan tempted them. In one way, that is true. Satan was only the examiner. God permitted Satan to test their faith. Through that temptation, God had a plan to teach them certain precious truths. Unfortunately, they failed in that examination. So this is true in the life of Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, David, and so on. So God often tries to teach us certain things through testing. So beware of that. Be careful about that. God will test and teach us. Number 2, moreover, nothing is out of syllabus in God's teaching. I told you about a prescribed syllabus. In all colleges and schools, they have a prescribed syllabus. I studied in the engineering college Trivandrum. I taught there also for more than 16 years. You see, I remember in those days, soon after the examination, the students will go through the question paper and they will find out some questions which have come not from the syllabus. On the next day, there will be some strike and all. The students will say that these many questions are out of syllabus. They will immediately go to the university and conduct a Kheravo there in those days. Nowadays, it is not possible. So, what is the reason? They say it is out of syllabus. That's the normal argument of all the students. But in God's teaching system, nothing is out of syllabus. Nobody can make such an argument or complaint later. What's the reason? In Psalm 24:1 we read, "The earth is the Lord's and all its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein." Everything belongs to God. You see, the earth is the Lord's. Everything in the world is the Lord's. Therefore, we don't have any right to complain, "Oh Lord, this is out of syllabus." Moreover, God will not prescribe the syllabus in advance. Consider the life of Job. Job was tested in a very unique way. He was not aware of that. Then what about Abraham? Abraham also was tested in a very strange way. No one else was tested as God tested Abraham or Job. So none of them didn't say, "Oh Lord, this is something unexpected," or "this is out of syllabus." We also have no right to say, when something happens in our lives, "Oh Lord, why did you permit this? This is something out of syllabus because I love you." The third thing is this: God tests are surprise tests. How many of you would like to have a surprise test? I think none of us. In all institutions, usually at the beginning of the semester itself, they will announce the date of examination also. None of us expect a surprise test. Of course, some teachers may be giving certain surprise tests in the classroom, that's different. But generally speaking, in our education system, as I told you, three things: there will be a prescribed syllabus, and nothing will come out of syllabus in our education system, and there won't be any surprise test. On the other hand, God's system is different, totally different. God will teach us through testing. More than teaching, there will be testing. Number two, nothing is out of syllabus because everything belongs to God. Number three, God often gives us surprise test. That is very much true in the life of Job. All on a sudden, he has been enjoying all the physical blessings. Then all on a sudden, in one day, he lost everything and all his children. It was totally unexpected. He might have had a great shock. What about Abraham? Abraham never expected that God will appear to him and tell him to sacrifice his only begotten son. It was a surprise test. So in our lives also, God will permit surprises. This is the way God teaches us. But that verse says, God not only works, God works together. That word is very important. God works together. The Greek word is synergio or synergio. From that word came the English word synergy. What is the meaning of synergy or synergio? Synergio means working together of many things. It is the working together of many things to produce a better product or outcome. So many things will work together and ultimately a better product or outcome will come. That's the meaning of synergy. Let me give you two simple examples. Think about some of the curries or some dishes we make in the kitchen. You see, that cook who makes that dish may be adding so many things as ingredients in that dish. And if you go and take each one separately, if you taste them, some of them may be bitter or sour. They don't have any taste. But when he prepares that dish, all these things will work together and ultimately produce a tasty dish. That's the meaning of synergio. Let me give a scientific example. All of you know something about sodium. Sodium is actually a very soft, poisonous element. We cannot eat sodium. Chlorine. You might have heard about chlorine. Chlorine is a poisonous gas basically. You see, sodium is poisonous and chlorine also is poisonous. But when a chemical reaction takes place between sodium and chlorine, what is the net result? You know it. What is that? Sodium chloride. Is that poisonous? No. Sodium chloride is the name for the common salt which we use every day in our kitchen. Sodium chloride is tasty. It gives flavor. It has many other advantages. You see, sodium in itself is poison, chlorine also is poison, but they work together. It will produce a good outcome. So here Paul uses that word. So what does it mean? Many things happened in our lives in the past. If you consider them individually, there may be some bad things, some adverse things, something that caused suffering. But God is working behind all these things, and ultimately He will bring a good out of it. And what is that good? That is the fifth truth. What is the result of this? What is the good mentioned in verse 28? That is mentioned in verse 29. Can you read verse 29? Romans 8:29. What do you read there? 28 says, in all things God worked for the good. And verse 29.
For whom He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren.
Yes. What is the good mentioned in verse 29? Many a time when we hear the word good, we think about some material blessings that we get in our lives. But Paul here mentions something different. Verse 29 speaks about our predestination to be conformed to the image of His Son. Putting it in simple terms, verse 29 speaks about the character of Jesus Christ or Christ-likeness. If you use a simple word, Christ-likeness. That is the good promised here. So through all the unhappy events that happened in our lives, God worked and ultimately He will bring Christ-likeness in our lives. Verse 29 is a future promise. In future, we all will be 100% like Jesus. As according to 1 John 3:2, when we meet Him face to face, we will be 100% like Him. That's a future event. But here, Paul refers to the transformation in our character, transformation in our lives. Beloved, through all the events that happen or God permits in our lives, God is making us more and more and more like Jesus. I can give you so many examples, both from the Bible and from the the Christian history. Let me quickly mention one or two. Think about the life of Joseph. What did his brothers do with him? They cast him into a pit. That is what we read in Genesis 37. Is that good? No, it is something evil. Later they sold him to Ishmaelites. Is that good in itself? No, it was a bad thing. Later he became a slave in the house of Potiphar. There Potiphar's wife made some false accusation. Is that good? No. Finally he came into the jail. Is that good? Again the answer is no, it is something bad. But ultimately, all these things that happened in his life for the past 12 years resulted in something good. That is what Joseph himself says in Genesis 50:20. But as for you, you meant evil against me. He is talking with his brothers. But God meant it for good in order to bring it about as it is this day to save many people alive. So primarily, it was a blessing to Joseph, and he became the protector of his own brethren in one sense. More than that, in the Old Testament, Joseph is the one who shows the life of Jesus Christ the maximum. He is the one who reflects the life of Jesus Christ the maximum. His meekness, his forgiveness, his love, so many things we can learn from his life. Actually, Genesis 50:20 is the Old Testament version of Romans 8:28. I can quote you some more examples. Think about Fanny Crosby. All preachers quote Fanny Crosby. Fanny Crosby became a blind girl when she was only 6 weeks old by the wrong treatment of a medical doctor. She was not born blind, but she became blind. Later, when she was only 6 months old, his father died. Think about these incidents. They are evil from a human point of view. But her mother was a godly mother, and her grandmother also was very godly. So they trained her up in the godly ways. Finally, even though she was totally blind, she lived as a godly person. She learned many things, and finally she was instrumental to write 8,000 English hymns. Many of the songs we sing, Blessed Assurance, Sweet Hour of Prayer, many of the songs are written by Fanny Crosby. Even though so many evil things happened in her life, since she was loving God and submitted to God's will, ultimately everything resulted in some good. Think about Joni Erickson Tada. She's still living. She met with an accident while she was diving at the age of 70. That is in 67 it happened. So she became quadriplegic. Quadriplegic means her legs and arms, everything got paralyzed because it affected her spinal cord. But she led a godly life. Probably her parents helped her. And later she started an organization ministry called Joni and Friends. And they are helping so many people, disabled people, and sharing gospel with them and bringing many to God's side. And 10 years ago she got cancer also. Do you know how did she respond? She said, now I have got cancer. Now I can serve among the cancer patients also. God has given me a new platform to serve among them. You see, many things in her life, from our viewpoint, our perspective, they are evil. But she had a different perspective. So that is the meaning of Romans 8, 28 and 29. Let me wind up. So 5 things we quickly saw. First one, the certainty of this promise. It is the promise of God, and we should know it for sure. Number 2, the condition. It is only for those who love God, who have been called according to His purpose. Third one, the comprehensiveness. All things, it includes all things. What all things? All small and big, expected and unexpected, and good and bad. Fourth one, who is the cause behind this promise? God Himself. God teaches us many things. I am not repeating them. In all things, God works for the good of those who love Him. God works all of them together, put them together and bring out some good. Finally, what is that good? Christ-likeness. Beloved, this is a very precious verse. Many precious truths are written in that verse. Let us understand them. Not only that, let us store up these things in our hearts and minds and live according to God's purpose, so that ultimately God will fulfill this promise in our lives too, provided we are sitting under the mighty hand of God. May the Lord, thank you for your patient listening. May the Lord bless you and help you to put these things into practice. May God bless you.